She stood at the edge of the training ground, wearing her oversized uniform and muddy boots. The sky was gray above her, and the cold wind pushed against her face like a silent challenge. No one spoke to her, no one helped her, and no one even asked her name. She was just another new recruit at boot camp, just another face in the crowd. But even in that crowd, she looked different. She was smaller than most, quieter than all, and her eyes carried a strange calm. The others joked about her. "She's too soft," one said, laughing. "She'll cry and quit by the end of the week," another added. They didn't whisper, they didn't hide their words. But she didn't react, not even once. She woke up before the bell, placed her boots before the others even rolled over in bed. She was always the first in line, always waiting, always silent. When others talked, she listened. When they laughed, she stayed quiet. And when they rested, she trained one rainy morning. While the others sat in the mess hall complaining about cold cereal, she was out on the track running alone in the rain. Lap after lap, her ponytail soaked. Her boots heavy with water, she didn't stop. Not even when her legs trembled. Not even when mud splashed her face. Some watched from the windows. Confused, why is she doing that? Someone asked, who is she trying to impress? Another said, but she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to survive. Her bunkmates started to notice small things. She folded her blanket with perfect corners every single morning. Her locker was spotless, shoes aligned like military art. She ate slowly, as if tasting every bite like it was her last meal. But she never looked tired, and she never broke the rules. One night, someone in her dorm whispered, "Maybe she's a robot." That made the others laugh, but it didn't change how they saw her. Strange, distant, quiet, still no one dared to bother her too much. Because something about her silence felt sharp, like it could cut one evening. A drill sergeant shouted for volunteers for night watch. Everyone groaned and looked away. She stepped forward without a word. The sergeant blinked in surprise but nodded at 2 a.m. While the rest of the base slept, she stood under the moon, watching shadows move across the training yard. Her breath fogged in the cold air. But her posture stayed strong halfway through her watch. A scream cut through the dark. Sharp, desperate, painful, without waiting. She sprinted toward the sound. She found a recruit lying on the wet ground. Leg twisted, blood on his forehead. He had slipped down a small cliff near the edge of the obstacle course. No one else had heard him. No one else had come. But she was already there, already lifting him onto her back. He groaned in pain, but she said nothing. Her face was focused, her arms shaking, but she walked. Step by heavy step, she carried him back to the camp, 3 miles away. When she arrived, the guards looked shocked. "Medic! Now!" she shouted, her first word in 2 weeks. They stared at her, stunned, not because she yelled, but because she had spoken at all. The injured recruit was taken to the hospital. He would be fine, thanks to her. The news spread across the camp like wildfire. The sun was sharp that morning, slicing across the training field like a warning. Recruits stood in rows, back straight, boots tight, sweat already forming on their necks, but all eyes shifted when the black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a man built like iron and pride. Broad chest, scars on his arms, sunglasses over cold eyes. He wasn't just anyone, he was a Navy SEAL, not fresh, not learning. He had been to places no map could name. His name was Marcus Wolf, and he carried his reputation like a badge. He had served in war zones, led missions that never made the news. He had the kind of voice that made rooms go silent, and he loved it. He was visiting the base for inspiration, as he called it. He liked showing the new blood what real soldiers looked like tossing jokes like grenades just to see who flinched. When he entered the obstacle yard, all heads turned. The recruits whispered his name like a warning, but she didn't react. She stood at the far end, alone, cleaning her gear, sunlight hitting the sweat on her brow. Arms wrapped in discipline, Marcus spotted her immediately. A woman alone, quiet and small, he grinned. He walked over with the confidence of someone who never expected to be challenged. "Hey there, soldier," he said loud enough for the others to hear. "What's your rank?" "General of Silence?" Laughter cracked around the field like fireworks. Some snorted, others chuckled nervously. She looked up slowly. Her eyes met his, steady, cool, unmoved. "I asked your rank," he repeated. One eyebrow raised like a dare, she stood up, straightened her spine, and answered, "Lieutenant Commander," she said in a voice so calm it silenced the heat. The air shifted, his grin faltered. A beat of silence passed, heavy and sharp. Then someone near the back whispered, "Wait, what?" Marcus blinked once, slowly. "You're joking," he muttered, almost to himself, but her ID badge, clipped to her chest, confirmed it. Her name. Her rank, it was all real, she outranked him. And she had said it like it meant nothing. He chuckled, trying to play it off. "Impressive," he said, voice tight. But the wind had already changed. The others looked at her with new eyes, and at him with quiet curiosity. He had mocked her, and learned too late that she had earned more than just rank. Later that day he asked around. He needed to understand how she, of all people, had climbed so high. The answers came back quiet and consistent. She doesn't talk much, but she moves like thunder. First to show up, last to leave. Doesn't blink under pressure. Saved a guy at night. Carried him 3 miles through mud. One recruit said she'd seen her run through barbed wire without flinching. Another said he saw her hold her breath underwater for over 3 minutes. But no one really knew her. And that scared Marcus more than he expected. He requested her service record. The first few pages were standard. Boot camp, top of the class, no complaints. But then came the red stamps. Classified, restricted access, clearance level 9. Even his own rank didn't give him full permission to view all her missions. He sat back in his chair, reading the little he was allowed to see, and his stomach tightened, because even the little he saw told him this. She had walked through things most men would never survive, and she did it without applause, without a single word. The next morning, Marcus found her on the shooting range. She was reloading without rushing, eyes calm like water. He walked up slowly, not as a challenger but as a student. "I didn't know who you were," he said honestly. She didn't respond, just kept cleaning her rifle. "I was wrong to joke," he added, voice lower now. She paused, looked up, and simply nodded, then went back to work. It was the most polite rejection of an apology he had ever received, and somehow it felt more powerful than any speech. Marcus didn't talk much that day. He stayed to observe training drills, but he watched her the most. The way others moved when she passed, not out of fear, but out of instinctive respect. She had become something rare. Not just a soldier, not just a leader, but a mystery wrapped in iron and silence. That evening, he sent a private message to the commander. It read, "Request, I want to shadow Lieutenant Commander A if she allows it." "I believe I have something to learn," the commander replied with a single line. "She doesn't teach with words. If you want to learn, keep up." Marcus understood then. Respect was not given, it was built, tested and bled for, and the woman he mocked, she carried more than rank. She carried a legacy too heavy for most men to bear. She carried him 3 miles, in the dark, alone? Some still doubted it, but the guards confirmed it, and from that night on, no one made fun of her anymore. They still didn't know her name. They still didn't understand her silence, but they watched her now, with quiet respect, and when she passed by, they moved aside not because of fear, but because they knew she was different. She was the girl with no voice, but her actions spoke louder than anyone's words ever could. At boot camp, where noise was common and silence was rare, she had earned a place not with jokes, not with strength, but with something much harder and courage. Rumors are like shadows. They stretch longer when the truth hides behind locked doors. And around her, those shadows grew every day. No one knew where she came from. No one knew what she had done before boot camp. But everyone felt that she wasn't ordinary. Not even close. In the barracks, whispers floated like smoke. "She's too calm," someone said. "She's seen something," another replied. Her name was never spoken loudly. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. Like saying it too loud might unlock a door no one was ready to open. Even high-ranking officers adjusted their tone when they spoke to her. They never barked orders, never raised voices. They gave nods instead of commands, as if speaking too hard might break something ancient inside her. The younger recruits noticed, and so did the SEALs, especially Marcus Wolf, who now watched her with the eyes of a man trying to understand a puzzle with missing pieces. He started asking around, quietly, carefully, but most people just shook their heads. "I've seen her file," one officer whispered, or at least tried to. "It's sealed," he added. Eyes wide, pages and pages marked classified. Top-level access only. Even the commander can't see everything. Marcus didn't give up. He had clearance most soldiers could only dream of. So he went to the records room, requested her file under the emergency authorization code he had rarely used. The clerk behind the desk looked nervous. "This file's been locked since it was created," he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Try anyway," he replied. When the file loaded, it came in pieces. Black bars covered large portions of text. Whole sections were missing or redacted, but the parts that remained were enough to make Marcus sit back in silence. Her first deployment wasn't listed under any unit name. It was under a special task force known only by 2 letters, SG. That name didn't even exist in official military databases. Only rumors buried deep in off-record meetings. One report described a mission in a war-torn city overseas. No maps, no air support, only shadows and threats. A team of elite soldiers had gone in, only one came out, her. Another line caught his eye. Extracted asset under heavy fire. Neutralized 5 hostiles with 0 casualties to civilians. But there was no video, no testimony, just one witness report that ended with, "She moved like smoke. She didn't speak, but when she looked at you, you felt like you were already dead." Marcus exhaled slowly. He had served in dangerous places, led men through hell and back, but this was different. This woman had moved in spaces the world pretended didn't exist. And she came back not to boast, but to train again, like it never happened, back on base. She was climbing the rope wall under the evening sun. No audience, no cheering, just quiet effort. Marcus walked up and stood beside the obstacle. "You're not just a soldier," he said softly. She didn't respond, just kept climbing. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he added. At the top of the wall, she paused, looked down at him. Her expression didn't change, but in that moment, Marcus felt the air around her change, like standing near something ancient and wild, something that had survived too much to need words. Later that week during strategy drills, she corrected a senior officer's plan with one quick glance. She moved a few pieces on the map, a silent hand here, a shift there. The entire simulation outcome changed. Success rate doubled. The room went quiet. She walked away before anyone could thank her. Word spread again, not loud, not dramatic, but like wind moving through trees, felt more than heard. Someone had seen her file. Someone whispered about ghost units. One SEAL swore he saw her name on a wall at a secret outpost overseas. A wall reserved only for those who didn't come back. Marcus now walked differently around her, not like a leader, not like a rival, but like a man who had seen a different kind of warrior, one who didn't wear medals, but earned them anyway, one who didn't shout, but spoke through actions, and one who had faced the dark and walked back. She wasn't a legend. Legends are exaggerated, glorified, sometimes fake. She was worse than a legend, and she was real. The recruits still didn't know who she truly was, but they stood a little straighter when she passed. The SEALs still whispered behind her back, but now their words were filled with awe, not doubt. And Marcus Wolf, once loud and proud, now saluted her, every time without a single joke. Because even though most of her story remained locked in classified files, everyone on that base now knew one truth. She wasn't just another soldier. She was the shadow behind every victory no one talked about, and her silence. It was earned, word by word, mission by mission, ghost by ghost. She never asked for attention, never asked to lead, never even asked for respect. But the more she stayed quiet, the more the system tested her. Like the military didn't trust what it could not understand. And she was something they couldn't label, couldn't predict, couldn't control. They gave her the hardest drills, the toughest instructors, the longest hours. Not once did she complain. She carried twice the weight in her backpack, was made to run more laps than anyone else. They threw her into freezing water before sunrise, and left her hanging from ropes under burning heat until her hands bled. Still, she said nothing. She finished everything. Even when her arms shook and her legs went numb. Some thought they were testing her strength. Others thought they were trying to break her. But those who watched closely saw something deeper. They were trying to understand her, and they were scared of what they couldn't one day. The base received a visit from a foreign military unit. They came for joint training. Among them were soldiers known for extreme survival skills. These were not rookies. These were warriors who had trained in mountains, deserts, even jungles. The commanders saw an opportunity. They decided to create a special test. No rules, no maps, no safety nets. Survive for 72 hours in unknown terrain with nothing but a knife and a radio. Names were chosen carefully. 5 from their side, 5 from ours. Her name was placed at the top. Without asking her, without warning, when the list was read aloud. Most soldiers turned to look at her. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded and walked away to prepare. Marcus Wolf followed her. "You know this isn't fair," he said. "They're throwing you into something meant to break you." She gave him a quiet look. Not angry, not afraid, just calm, and then she said, "Then let it try." The team was dropped deep into the wild hills. No food, no shelter, just instinct within hours. One recruit twisted his ankle. Another panicked when the radio stopped working. The others started arguing, blaming each other. She didn't speak. She moved ahead alone, blending with the trees. She used dry leaves to warm her hands, used broken branches to build shelter, caught small fish with thread from her own jacket, and left food behind each night for those falling behind. They never saw her do it, but they woke up fed. They never heard her speak, but they followed the tracks she left behind, like a ghost guiding them through danger. On the second night, a storm hit, winds howled like wolves, and rain poured down like war drums. 3 soldiers huddled under rocks. Wet and shivering, she appeared without a sound, handed them a tarp made of tied vines and leaves, then vanished again into the rain. By the 3rd day, even the foreign soldiers noticed. One of them said, "She's not surviving, she's controlling the wild." They tried to follow her path, but she moved too fast, too light, like she belonged to the silence around her. When the 72 hours ended, the extraction chopper arrived. The others stumbled in. Exhausted, bruised, half-broken, she walked out from the trees, skin scratched, eyes clear. She didn't smile. She didn't speak, but the pilot, who had seen hundreds of missions, looked at her and said, "Damn." Back at the base, reports came in. Commanders read every word carefully. They saw how she didn't just survive, and she led without a title. They saw how others followed her without even realizing it. They saw how the foreign unit listed her as Asset Alpha in their report, which meant the most valuable one. Still, she didn't ask for anything. No medal, no ceremony, no praise. She simply returned to her bunk, washed her socks, and went to the range to practice shooting. Like it was just another Monday, but the base had changed. Her name echoed differently in the halls now. Not in laughter, but in quiet respect. The kind that comes only when someone does the impossible and makes it look easy. That night, Marcus knocked on her door. "I brought you a hot meal," he said. Holding a plate, she looked at him surprised. Not because of the food, but because for the first time someone wasn't testing her. He wasn't measuring her, he was thanking her. She took the plate, nodded once, and sat by the window. Outside, the storm had cleared, but inside something deeper had changed. They had thrown her into a fire to see if she'd burn. Instead, she became the flame. The call came in the middle of the night. A soft buzz, a few quick knocks on the steel door. Inside the barracks, soldiers half asleep lifted their heads. But when the commander's voice echoed through the hallway, everyone froze. High-risk operation, immediate deployment, 0 margin for error. The words carried weight heavier than armor. It was the kind of mission no one volunteered for. Too dangerous, too uncertain, too likely to end in silence. A team of foreign scientists had been taken hostage deep inside enemy territory. Every rescue plan had failed, every route was a trap. Even the elite units had refused to go. No one wanted to die for a mission that already looked dead. And then her name was spoken, Lieutenant Commander A, the quiet one, the woman whose story was half rumor, half legend, the one they couldn't break, couldn't understand, couldn't scare. She looked up from her bunk, eyes calm. No emotion, no hesitation. She simply said, "When do we leave?" Marcus Wolf, standing beside the commander, blinked in disbelief. "Wait, she's leading this?" he whispered. The commander nodded. "She's not just leading," he said softly. "She's the only one who said yes." The mission briefing was short and brutal. They were to infiltrate a valley controlled by a hostile militia. 6 hostages, armed guards, no clear map. The satellite feed was blurry, the terrain was mined, and the timeline, only 10 hours. Failure meant not only death, but war. Most soldiers in the room avoided her gaze. They respected her, yes, but this was different. This was suicide wrapped in silence. Marcus finally stepped forward. "I'm coming too," he said. The commander hesitated, but one look from her was enough. She nodded, and he was in. They moved out before dawn, the helicopter blades slicing through the fog like knives. The valley below was dark, quiet, waiting. As the chopper hovered over the drop zone, she looked down and whispered, "No second chances." And then she jumped, straight into the unknown. The landing was rough. Mud, rocks, cold air biting through their suits. They moved in silence, every step measured, every breath counted. She led them through narrow paths only she seemed to see, like she had walked them before. Her instincts were frighteningly sharp. She stopped just once, raised a hand. Marcus froze, and a moment later, the ground in front of them exploded, a hidden mine. If she hadn't stopped them, they would have been gone. They pressed on through the smoke and fire, reached the target building by dawn. The hostages were inside, terrified, weak. She motioned for the team to split, her eyes scanning every shadow. Then she slipped through a broken window like a ghost. No sound, no wasted movement. Inside, she found 2 guards asleep. She didn't kill them. She tied and gagged them instead. She wasn't there for blood. She was there to end blood. Minutes later, the hostages were free, but the extraction route was compromised. Enemy patrols were closing in from both sides. The team prepared to fight, but she shook her head. "There's another way," she said quietly, and pointed toward a steep ravine hidden under mist. Marcus stared at her. "That's a drop, not a path," he said. She gave him a faint smile. "Then let's fall smartly." They used vines, gear straps, even their jackets to create a makeshift line. One by one they descended, hearts pounding, hands bleeding. She went last, cutting the rope behind her. By the time enemy soldiers reached the ravine's edge, the team was already gone, swallowed by fog, safe. When they reached the extraction point, the helicopter was waiting. The hostages cried, hugging each other. Marcus looked at her. She was sitting quietly, checking her knife for dirt. No excitement, no pride, just stillness. He said softly, "You saved everyone." She replied, "That's the job." Back at base, the debrief was silent. The commander read the report with trembling hands. No casualties, no gunfire, 6 hostages recovered. He looked up. "How did you—" But she was already gone. Outside, she stood under the stars, alone, the night breeze brushing her face. She had done what no one else dared to, and yet no one would ever read her name in the papers. Marcus joined her quietly. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "You keep doing this, going where no one else will." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Someone has to," she whispered, then turned toward the barracks, her silhouette fading into the night, strong, silent, unforgettable. Marcus Wolf sat alone on the edge of his bunk. The base was quiet that evening, unusually quiet. Outside, the wind stirred dust across the concrete, but inside his chest, something heavier moved. Regret. He had seen her lead a mission no one wanted. He had followed her into fire, watched her guide terrified men across cliffs, through traps and out alive. She hadn't asked for help, hadn't shown fear. She had been the storm that cleared the path. And yet, just weeks ago, he had joked about her rank, mocked her silence, judged her before knowing the weight she carried. Now he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his head. "Someone has to," she'd said after the rescue. So soft, so simple, yet it hit him harder than a battlefield explosion. He rose slowly, walked past the empty bunks, down the hallway toward her quarters. When he knocked, there was no answer, but the door creaked open. She wasn't inside. Instead, he found her in the open yard, under the pale floodlights, kneeling beside a broken training dummy. She was fixing it, not for recognition, just because it needed to be done. He watched her tie the straps, check the wires, wipe the mud from its face like it was human. He cleared his throat gently. She looked up, not surprised, not bothered. He stepped closer. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. She didn't speak, so he continued. "I misjudged you. I laughed at you. I questioned your place." His voice cracked slightly. "And then I watched you risk your life to save people who didn't even know your name." She finally stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. Her eyes were calm, not angry, just still. "You weren't the first," she said. "And you won't be the last." Marcus dropped his gaze. "I was proud," he admitted. "I thought I'd seen enough of the world to know who mattered." He paused. "But watching you, I realized I've been blind. You don't wear your strength. You carry it quietly." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You're not weak," she said softly. "You're just learning to listen." Those words hit deeper than any scolding ever could. They didn't come from pity. They came from a place of understanding, of having walked through fires where ego burned away. Marcus nodded slowly. "I want to earn your respect," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to," she said. "You just need to respect yourself enough to see others clearly." The next morning, something unexpected happened. Marcus called an open meeting with the SEAL trainees and base officers. He stood before them, not as a leader, but as a student. He told them everything, how he mocked her, how she saved lives, how he realized that rank isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves in silence. He turned to where she stood in the back, arms folded, unreadable, and then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He saluted her, not the casual kind, not out of duty, but a full, sharp, respectful salute. The kind you give to a superior not just in title, but in spirit. For a moment the room didn't know how to react. Then slowly others followed. One by one, heads turned, arms lifted, backs straightened, until the entire group, men, women, veterans, rookies, were saluting her name. She didn't smile. She didn't tear up. She simply nodded. But something in her chest softened, not because she needed their approval, but because it meant they finally saw. Later, Marcus found her near the shooting range. He brought coffee, strong, bitter. No sugar. She accepted it with a quiet thanks. "You know," he said, sipping slowly, "I used to think leadership was about being loud, giving orders, commanding attention." She looked at him, waiting. He chuckled. "But you lead in a way I didn't know existed." "Now I see," he continued. "It's not about how many people follow you. It's about why they do." She leaned against the fence, watching birds cross the sky. "They follow because I walk ahead, not above," she said. "And I never ask them to go where I wouldn't go first." That night, the base was different. Conversations changed, so did training routines. People stopped measuring each other by noise, height, or swagger. They started watching how others showed up when no one was clapping. They started noticing the quiet warriors. And in that stillness, they found new strength. Marcus Wolf never forgot that day. Not because of the salute, but because of what it taught him. Real respect is not taken. It is given, and real leaders don't demand loyalty. They inspire it. The base was alive with the usual noise. Boots stomping against concrete, whistles blowing, radios crackling. But beneath the surface, something had changed. The air felt heavier, not from fear, but from quiet expectation. Everyone knew she was coming back today. It had been 5 days since the last operation. 5 days since she led a second rescue mission. No cameras, no headlines, no glory. Just another impossible task she made look ordinary. She returned every hostage, injured but breathing, and disappeared into the background again. The soldiers went back to their drills, but their eyes kept glancing toward the main gate. Even the new recruits who had never spoken to her stood taller. They had heard the stories. They had seen how the officers treated her with a different kind of respect. The kind that isn't taught, it's earned. That morning, the commander made a quiet call. He didn't send orders, he simply said, "She's arriving at 800, and hung up the phone. That was enough. Word moved faster than orders ever could. One soldier told another. A mechanic whispered it to a medic. And like wind through dry grass. The entire base knew at exactly 7:59. The main gate opened. The hum of an armored vehicle rolled in like distant thunder. She stepped out, uniform dusty, arm in a sling. Boots scratched but standing tall. She didn't expect anyone to be there. She thought she would return like always, quietly. But as she took her first step onto the base, she paused. Rows of soldiers stood in perfect silence, from privates to generals, from janitors to pilots. They lined the path like a living hallway. No one moved, no one spoke, then it happened. One young recruit near the front, barely old enough to shave, raised his hand and saluted. It was shaky, unsure, but full of heart. And like dominoes falling in slow motion, another followed, then another. Then the entire front line stood with arms lifted high. She blinked, caught off guard. For a moment she just stared, and then the salute spread. Through the engineers, through the medics, through the officers standing near their jeeps. Even the cooks outside the mess hall stopped stirring, wiped their hands and saluted. The entire base stood still, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. It wasn't about rank anymore. It wasn't about gender or orders or medals. It was about who she was, about what she had become without ever asking for it. At the end of the long path stood Marcus Wolf. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He simply stood at attention. Eyes forward, he had seen warriors fall but never rise the way she had. She took a breath and stepped forward. The sound of her boots echoed like a drumbeat, each step heavy with memory. Each salute she passed added weight to her silence. But still she said nothing. When she reached the center of the courtyard, she stopped, turned slowly, facing them all, and then, for the first time in her career, she saluted back. Not fast, not stiff, but slow, full, and from the soul. A single motion that pulled the breath from every chest. The silence grew deeper. Some recruits swallowed tears they didn't expect. Even the commander lowered his head. And for once time didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like it had paused just for her. Later, no one could agree on who started the chant. It was soft at first, barely above a whisper. Commander A, Commander A, Commander A, and then it grew. Louder, unified, unstoppable. Not shouted like a cheer, but spoken like a vow, a promise that her name would never be forgotten. She didn't smile, but her eyes shimmered just once. She placed a hand over her heart, not in pride, but in shared pain, because she knew what these people had seen. She knew what they carried, and now they knew what she carried too. That night no celebration was held. No medals were pinned. No speeches were made. But the base didn't need them, because what happened that morning had said more than words ever could. The next day, things returned to routine, but something invisible lingered in the air. The training felt sharper, the silence felt warmer. And when new recruits asked why people stood up a little straighter when she passed, the older ones would say, "You weren't here the day the whole base saluted her name." She never asked for fame. She never stood in front of cameras or flashed her medals. In fact, many didn't even know she had any. She didn't post about missions, didn't attend press conferences, didn't smile for headlines, and yet her silence became louder than any battlefield gunfire. After that salute, the one the whole base gave her, something changed beyond the wire fences. Her story began to travel, not through news anchors or breaking headlines, but through whispers, through memories, through hearts. A young cadet at a different base heard about her. He failed his first shooting test. Everyone laughed, told him to go home. But someone leaned over and said, "There was a woman once. They say she barely spoke a word, but she outran, outlasted, and outlived everyone who laughed at her." He stayed. And passed the next week because of her in a distant city. A girl stood in front of a military academy office. Too afraid to walk in, her hands shook, her eyes full of doubt, until a woman in uniform walked by and smiled. "You look like her," the woman said. "Who?" the girl asked. "Lieutenant Commander A," she whispered. The girl straightened her back and stepped through the doors. Back at her old base, her bunk remained untouched. Her locker still closed inside. Her boots sat polished, her uniform pressed, but she was no longer there after that final mission. She resigned quietly. No ceremony, no send-off. Just a form signed and a soft goodbye. Some said she went to a quiet cabin in the mountains. Others believed she worked for secret intelligence. A few believed she simply disappeared, like she had never been real, but those who knew her, they knew better. She wasn't gone, she had just returned to where the noise couldn't follow. Marcus Wolf visited her locker once a week, not to grieve, but to remember. To remind himself what a real leader looked like. Not one who shouted orders, but one who walked first into the dark. One morning, years later, a new commander arrived at the base. He found a faded photo pinned behind the mess hall kitchen door. It showed her in uniform, standing on a cliffside. Rain in her hair, eyes full of fire. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written, "She didn't speak much, but when she did, the world listened." The commander didn't move the photo. He ordered it framed instead, and placed it in the training hall. So every recruit could see her face before touching a weapon, and so her legacy lived on. Not through medals, but through movement. Not through applause, but through action, not through noise, but through respect. Every time a soldier helped a teammate instead of stepping over them, every time a voice of doubt was answered with quiet courage, every time someone chose to lead by example, her legacy grew in the years that followed. More women joined the military. More quiet voices found strength. More silent warriors stepped forward, and each time someone asked why they pushed harder, why they didn't give up, they whispered her name. Not loudly, but in the same way she had lived, with calm, with grace, with unshakable will. A memorial was built at the edge of the training field. Small, simple, no statues, just a stone with her rank, her name, and one line carved at the bottom. She didn't ask to be remembered, but we remember her anyway.